So I'd next call Jan Burney. Now, Jan, I note in the written notes that you've provided there are a number of references to Brooklands.
Yes.
The specific decision that we're making today relates to the regeneration strategy for South Shore and South New Brighton. So I just draw your attention to that. You have 10 minutes to present to us, allowing time for questions if you choose. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jan Burney. I live in Brooklands. I'm addressing the agenda, item 22. I'm aware that I am talking for Brooklands, but the decisions made in item 22 or the discussion affects the other coastal communities as well, like ours. I'm a resident of the small rural residential settlement of Brooklands. There are approximately 19 privately owned properties remaining in our rent zone community. Item 22, 410 states. It was intended that Regenerate strategy would inform changes to the district plan, either through the Regeneration Plan or Resource Management Act processes, along with the implementation actions. This was intended to be a pilot for the project for the adaptation planning and subsequent plan changes for all coastal communities in Christchurch, identified as being at risk from coastal hazards in the 2017 Coastal Hazard Assessment for the Christchurch and Banks Peninsula. Brooklands has a specific and unique environment. The impact of earthquake damage has been assessed, but no remediation or mitigation has been triggered as a priority. Each coastal community is unique, and a strategic overarching policy to create a project as a template is not appropriate. Conflating earthquake damage and coastal hazards adaptation will create an inequitable, unbalanced outcome unless informed discussion with specific communities affected takes place. The delay in the future use of Brooklands red zoning is having a detrimental effect upon our community and the wider Lower Styx catchment. The area has much to offer, but the potential has not been realised. Regenerate Christchurch State of Brooklands. We will continue to work with Brooklands community to better understand their priorities and determine an approach for regeneration planning in this area. We recognise that this area has unique circumstances and are likely to need a different approach from that proposed for the Avon-Otago River Corridor. We need to gain a better understanding of the characteristics of Brooklands, including further information about the coastal influences. We will continue to be open, visible and respectful with this community as we progress the regeneration planning in this area for the future. It is an extraordinarily detrimental for people, property and for the environment to continue to be captured in an interminable hold zone, to be continued abandoned by policy, planning and strategy. We may be small in number, but our community does matter. We matter, and we must, for our social, economic well-being and health, have a recovery and a pathway forward, some future to live to. Respect for people and communities includes care, consideration of rights. It includes informed decision-making. It includes transparency. It includes truth. I'm requesting an initial meeting with Regenerate Christchurch and partners to set up a community meeting for the Brooklands residential red zones residents in the very near future, to plan a way forward and to envisage a future. Thank you for your time and consideration of my request. I realise it's outside of scope, but I don't believe it is. This is about coastal communities and adaptation.
Yeah, and thanks for taking the time to come along and talk about the issues this morning.
Thank you.
It certainly is part of the wider conversation, as you say. So that does leave us a few minutes for questions. Glenn and then Sarah. Glenn.
Thank you, Jan. That was great. Can you please take us deeper into your sixth point, where you refer to conflating earthquake damage and coastal hazards? Could you please unpack that a bit more?
By conflating the earthquake damage and the coastal hazards at the initial document for the South Shore, South Brighton, the strategy, it eliminates the earthquake damage. The coastal hazard risk assessment will take a priority over the earthquake legacy damage. My opinion is if some of the earthquake damage is actually addressed, it could help along the adaptation process and shorten that process and decisions made upon that.
If I can just follow up on that, it'll help it along in terms of community openness or...
The transparency, information upgrading, an information vacuum currently exists, and what we are told is often not what we are seeing on the ground, like as per modelling, the Christchurch City Council modelling, the EQC, damage and risk assessments, insurance risks and assessments. Each entity has a different way of addressing the issue, but none of them address the issue. None of them have addressed the issues fully for people in those worst affected areas. There is a gap, there's a massive gap for those worst affected.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you very much. I don't think it's out of scope at all.
Thank you.
I think, so the two key points here seem to be, firstly, keeping those two issues separate, the earthquake issues and the future adaptation. And the other thing is that you don't want the work in your area to be held up by processes in another area. Is that right? You want to be able to start that work in your area as well.
Yes, our area is probably a little bit easier to do. It's a very small area, and it has multiple. We've got parks and reserves, we've got ECAN, we've got the river, we've got the Christchurch City Council, we have Regenerate Christchurch, we have red zones, and it might sound complicated, but if a discussion is had, some of the solutions could be far simpler.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of people. Yeah. We don't trigger a priority because the amount of people that could be at risk. However, I'm looking, but I don't see that as an adequate explanation.
Okay.
If we can fix and have some conversations and get some resolution out of a smaller area, sometimes that could actually make it clearer for the larger, the more populated areas.
Yeah.
And if we can find some pathways through.
Okay,
for that discussion.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Yanni.
Yeah, thank you for the submission. I just want to understand, in terms of a way forward, whether it's a planning issue, as you said, whether we need changes to planning documents, or whether it's mainly around infrastructure repairs, infrastructure remediation.
Some of the planning documents for the red zone, the specific purpose flatland recovery zone, I see as an impediment to the recovery for individual and community. The specific purpose flatland recovery zone was solely to protect the Crown land. It's not to protect us.
So
it is solely and utterly to protect.
So the reason for asking it was to really understand whether we need to get like a Regenerate plan with planning powers, or whether we just need an infrastructure sort of repair program. But it sounds like we need a Regenerate plan.
We do need a plan. Where there's forget the strategy. The strategy has been delayed. That is the strategy that has been. So that strategy was very effective. But what we want now is a plan, and the plan could include. We don't know, and from reading the documents, it's a little bit unclear on some of the legislative and statutory responsibilities held division between the council and Regenerate Christchurch, and how that takeover of the role, whether it is actually able to be done without a change in legislation.
Right, but just so I'm clear, in terms of your preference is, or the request is to get Regenerate through the annual work program to commit to timeframes for a regen plan for the Brooklands area.
Yes, and also, I've already had the discussion with the working party, and through the global consent applications, stormwater consent applications, on the modelling and the the damage assessment to the river's edge, etc. Some of the modelling is extraordinarily suspect over the period of time. It's in fact, it needs an in-depth inquiry into some of the modelling over this period of time. I could document the different modelling, finished floor levels, for example, risk levels, model scenarios, and the assumptions that are put in. Some of them are quite outrageous. One of the assumptions for Brooklands is that the new subdivisions and planning, new subdivisions and development can go ahead in Brooklands because we've been abandoned. And that allows, and that's in planning and resource management documents for example, Preston's, the motorway. It's in our Styx SMP, produced by the council, that says Brooklands will be abandoned, therefore we can increase the flood risk. This is preempting, this is the council planning, strategy and policy, preempting the future use of the red zone
There are certainly
and our futures.
There are certainly some good points that you've made as part of the presentation and the answers to questions. Thank you very much indeed for that. Just noting your request,
Yes.
and noting that that's a request of Regenerate Christchurch rather than council, I noticed that we've got the Chief Executive of Regenerate Christchurch, Ivan Yaufeta, in the public gallery this morning. I don't doubt that he would have heard that request, and obviously we'd be very keen to see a way forward there, so thank you.
Briefly, as we're meeting, what we had a couple of weeks ago with Leanne Dalzell, she suggested that she would get back to me on a meeting as well. So I see it as a joint, because we have joint issues in our area between Regenerate and Christchurch City Council. So if we can sort something out there.
I also had a word to our own Chief Executive while you were speaking, so we'll make sure that gets picked up in some meaningful way. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.